Welcome to the Pulse of Healthcare. This is Dr. John McCormick. I'm here with Virginia again, and we're going to talk a little bit about RX and Trump RX specifically. That came out with a lot of fanfare. You know, I saw a lot of, I'm going to say headlines, because anytime you dig into the article, the story becomes more involved. But a lot of headlines like, this is going to be great, and people are going to save a lot of money. And of course, since we're in the find the best rates for all of our members' business, anytime somebody comes out and says, this is the best thing since sliced bread, you should definitely look at it. We do.
We do. We deep dive into it.
Deep dive. So as we know, and we've talked about in other podcasts, you know, the GLP-1s and the other things that are like kind of in that classic class of medications are really some of the biggest driving factors over the last 2 years that have increased the overall cost of insurance, and driven a lot of rate increases for groups. When you have, you know, sometimes even your small and medium groups, it doesn't take 2 or 3, 4 people getting on one of these high cost GLP-1s, and suddenly the plan is significantly upside down. So, Virginia, when you took your first deep dive, and let's just focus on that class of GLP-1s, what did you find that was like, oh, this isn't seeing what it actually seems, you know?
So, in my deep dive, you know, I will say that this does have a lot of promise, so I cannot wait to continue to follow and see what all it does. They didn't have that many choices in the GLP-1 area, but when you get into it and start looking, then it comes up with a quote-unquote coupon. Okay, you get it just like some of the other single care, GoodRx. Once you select what you're needing and wanting, then it pops up with a show this coupon to your pharmacist. Okay, no biggie, that's great. It's for a limited time. 1, 2, maybe 3 months, and then the price of what it shows goes up. As well as continuing to deep dive, not all pharmacies will accept that coupon.
So give me an example. So I think you looked at Ozempic, right? We talked about that. And so I'm going on, I'm punching in. My plan said, hey, you know, if you're using our plan, Ozempic's not covered, or maybe it is covered, but it's very expensive, and you might have a really high co-insurance or deductible. And so they're saying, hey, go do this. And you go in and you're like, wow, it's $200, right?
Correct. But that's only for 1, 2, maybe 3 months,
So,
depending on what prescription.
right. So I get a prescription, and cool, but now I'm 2 months in and it's no longer valid. What's the price then? Does it even say?
It doesn't say.
Right. So it could be jumping all the way back up
what
to
it
the
was.
commercial rate, which we know is in the
Thousands.
yeah, it can be over $1,000 for some of these drugs based on your prescription, right? Of course, what's the other limitation on that, right? Just like GoodRx, you think GoodRx, it's accepted everywhere. Well, it's not. and you know, I almost immediately saw articles from pharmacies that were like, yeah, you can do that, but we don't accept the coupon.
Right. So that goes back to, so your larger brand name pharmacies, well, and I'll say big store,
CVS,
Walgreens, they will accept it. But your local mom and pop businesses, the ones that try to help you every way possible, that you want to support because they are local, 9 times out of 10 they will not. Because
right, so here we are. You know, Texas is a big state, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of states that have a lot of rural areas, and the only pharmacy in their area is a pharmacy that might have been in that community for 100 years. You know,
your mom and pop wouldn't.
They're not a CVS. There's never going to be a CVS in that community. It just doesn't have enough market share to substantiate it. Mm-hmm. You're not going to be able to use that there. Because they would actually lose money dispensing that to you.
At that cost, yes.
Right. So this is one of those things where we don't want people to go in and be angry with their local pharmacist because they got a coupon, you know, from any side, and then the pharmacist looks at that and says, yeah, no, it's not the pharmacist's fault. All right, it's just their actual acquisition cost is higher than the cost that coupon's telling you to buy it for.
Correct.
Right? So I want to be on the defense about these local pharmacists that, please don't get angry with them.
Correct.
We think it's a great solution if it's short term, but it's not a long term solution, ladies and gentlemen. There's, especially for these high cost drugs. Now, you want to talk about generic drugs and things like that, fantastic program.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and most of the time you can get those things, and there's a lot of programs that do that. Even the Mark Cuban program's a decent program. We have our own program that's actually cheaper than the Mark Cuban program. All right, that does those kinds of things. So that's just, I thought it was so important that we kind of sit down kind of
Yes.
quickly after the fact and talk about that and bring it up. Switching gears to the group plan side, it just so happens that almost concurrently the Department of Labor put out some new guidance on pharmacy benefit managers, PBMs. And if you're following the news or paying attention to healthcare, they've been painted with the giant evil brush like everybody else, I hate to say, in the healthcare business. They're just out trying to raise money, and there's all these schemes, and that's not wrong. There are a lot of PBMs that are making an enormous amount of money,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not being transparent, and and that is specifically to the detriment of mostly these large employer groups
Yes.
that are using the big name carriers that are in this incestuous relationship where they're the plan and they're the pharmacy, and so I hate to say, they're kicking back money
Back,
within
mhm.
their own circle, but that's what they're doing. And they weren't disclosing that to the employer, so the employer was paying a much higher rate for the pharmaceutical than the plan was paying.
Correct.
So this is one of those things where words matter, all right? And people like to throw out transparent. We have a transparent PBM. Well, it's really important when you're engaging with any plan, any TPA, to say, I heard the word transparent. What does that mean? All right? What am I actually paying? Am I paying the same rate as the acquisition cost of the PBM plus the pharmacy markup? Well, that's fair. That's the number of people in that chain, right? Or am I paying, a acquisition cost plus a PBM markup plus a distribution markup
And a fee just to have this particular PBM or this particular pharmacy access.
Right. And then, is there also an additional fee, that the plan is paying to utilize that PBM? So all of those factors come into play. And I'll tell you, as a plan manager, all these PBMs charge some scaling fee to the plan, to the groups, to access their PBM alleged better discounts, right? Which is why we use a combination of strategies. We use a strategy that engages those things because sometimes that's the best route. Sometimes we're using, overseas. Sometimes we're using other things to make sure that we can get the best, the best price for the pharmacy that we're trying to dispense. It can be extraordinarily complicated, as an individual to try to navigate that, which is, of course, why we're here.
That's it.
All right, so that's it for today. But we certainly wanted to hit on that, because that rolled out again with so much fanfare, and obviously we think it's a good product. There's a lot to learn there. That's continued to divide, but we don't want people to think that it does something that it does not.
Or that's your only option.
Right, and that's your only option. There are certainly other options to do that. Thanks again for joining us with the Pulse of Healthcare. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.